Today's class is about functions. Functions you might have seen in C or C++. So the use of functions in PHP, they are the way in which functions are used in PHP. It is similar to the use of functions in C or C++. Okay, there is a slight difference in the way functions are declared. We will come to that. But besides that, the use of functions, the way in which it is used, the way in which functions are called, that all remain the same in C or C++. Okay, so we usually consider functions as a block of organized reusable code that can be used again and again, and these set of codes are there to perform a specified task. And functions usually increase the modularity, the readability of the program. And why we are using functions? We have many reasons to suggest that why we should use functions in our program. Okay, you can go through these points, and I think once you complete all these slides, you can come back to this very slide to know what is meant by these points. Okay, in fact we may be using functions in many different places. We know the uses. Okay, so these points actually suggest the reasons behind we use functions in any programming language. It's not in PHP, but it suggests that why should we use functions, what is the use of functions, say in any programming language. And we know that functions in any programming language can be classified into two. One is built-in function and second is user-defined function. And built-in functions are available in almost all programming languages. Okay, there could be a difference in the number of built-in functions available across different programming languages, but by and large built-in functions are there in all programming languages. Okay, so day in day out we are using built-in functions when we write programs. Okay, say for example, to find the square root of a number, we don't want to write the routine, the programming code to find the square root of a number. We have certain built-in functions. To find the length of a string, there are built-in functions. To exit from the program, we may be using a built-in function. Okay, so these are the examples. Printf and scanf in C, they are built-in functions. To print a statement, to read a value, we are using printf and scanf. Actually, we don't know what is happening behind in printing a statement in C. We don't know how a value is read. We simply use printf to print a value. We use scanf to read a value. So there could be programming statements written inside these functions, and our job is to simply call these functions printf and scanf. They may do their job. Similarly, exit and square root are two built-in functions that we are using C++. Concat and character at, that is used in Java. Okay, and you know what these functions may do in respective languages. Similarly, we use echo, that's a built-in function available in PHP, and now you may be knowing what echo may do. Echo may print out, like printf in C. Echo may print a value, a string in PHP. GetType is another built-in function that is there to trace the type of a variable. String reverse is a built-in function that is used to reverse a given string. We don't want to write a lengthy code to reverse a string. Simply call this built-in function string reverse that will do the job of reversing a string. Okay, so you can go through, you can make a reference to the number of built-in functions available in PHP. There are plenty of them. So built-in functions actually increases the convenience of program writing. We don't want to write the statement to find the type of a variable. We have a built-in function get type. Okay. So built-in functions increases the convenience. That actually takes us away from the headache of writing programming lines. That is already written there. Only thing is we have to execute them by mentioning the function name. So all the built-in functions are there to perform a specified task. In fact, that point is common to built-in functions and user-defined function. Whatever may be the category, functions are there to perform a specified task. The difference with the built-in functions is actually they are already written. We don't want to do anything except to call those functions to get the job done. Okay. And coming to the second category of functions, it is user-defined function. Something the user or the programmer has to write on himself or herself. And just we have discussed that functions actually improves the programming readability. If a specified task is repeated over and over in a program, we don't want to repeat the same programming statements over and over. Instead, you encapsulate all those programming statements into a function, call the function, get the job done. That actually increases the readability of our program. Program looks nice and clean. Rather than repeating the same programming code in multiple places in your program, you create a function, write the programming statement inside, and wherever you have to perform the same task, you call the function, do the job. Okay, that is what that is for we are using functions. Okay, and many times we have to perform certain specified task in our program. In all those times we can use a function. If you want to find the sum of 100 numbers, and that has to happen in many places in your program, you don't want to write the code for finding the sum of 100 numbers in all the places where you have to get the sum. Instead, you write a function that contains the code to find the sum of 100 numbers, and wherever you have to find the sum of 100 numbers, you just call the function. The sum will be generated for you. Okay, and the syntax of using user-defined function in PHP is slightly different from C or C++. To use a user-defined function, we actually have to use a keyword function that should be prefixed before the name of the function, and the rest remains the same, just like in C or C++. The function body starts with an opening brace, ends with a closing brace, and in between these two brackets we have the actual function code. So when you use the function in your program, when you call the function in your program, whatever you write here, that will be executed. So this is what I have just mentioned. A function has to have a name, and the function body starts with an opening brace and closed with a closing brace. In between we have the programming statements. And when you name a function, there are certain rules. It should start with a letter or an underscore. It should start with a letter or an underscore. And function names are not case sensitive. If you call the function in capital letter, if you type in capital letter or in small case, both will call the same function. So my point is, if you have a function in a program as sum, if you make a call as sum that is written in capital letter or in small case, lower case, it will, both the calls will address the same function. So the point is, function names are not case sensitive. If you define the function in lower case, and when you make the function call, if that function call happens to be in uppercase, that will definitely call the same function. Okay. Now this is an example for using functions in PHP. We have the keyword function. Name of the function is write message, and this function body contains a print statement and echo statement, hello world, and this is your function call. Okay, and when you call this function, this will be executed and that will produce hello world. So the function write message is there to print a statement as hello world. So when you call the function write message, function write message will be invoked, called, and that will do the intended job of printing the statement hello world. And the one function we have seen is, you can see that after the name of the function we have an empty bracket. In fact, we are using the bracket to contain the arguments. You may be knowing what are the arguments. So when functions are called, we can pass some values according to the situation you are using a function. We can pass certain values from the calling point to the function. Okay, and if you don't have any values to pass on, you can keep your function like this. After the name of the function, there is an empty bracket. But when you have arguments to pass on, that can be included inside the bracket. In fact, you can use any number of arguments, provided they should be separated using a comma. So an argument is just like a variable that is there to receive certain values that is passed from the calling point. So you can see this function family name. We have two arguments here, fname and year, and this function actually prints the value of fname and year along with this string, the value of the variable fname and value of the variable year along with the string born in. Now from where the variable fname and year receives value? They actually receive value from the function calling point. So you can see that the call to function family name is made here with two values, the string value and thus year value, right? So when the function is called, this value is copied to this string, and this year value is copied to this variable. Okay. The name could be Hage, Hague, or whatever. Okay, whatever is the name value, that is copied to this variable f name, and 1975 a number value that is copied to the variable year. Okay, so the variables f name and year that receive value from the function calling point. The Hage is copied to f name, 1975 to year, and when the function is called using the value Hage and 1975, this will be produced as the output. Hage is born in 1975. We again call the same function using a different name and year value, stale and 1978. This time stale is copied to variable of name, 1978 to year, and for the second time the function family name is called that may produce an output stale born in 1978. This is called again with KJim 1983, which may respectively be copied to f name. F name may receive KJim and year may receive 1983. So this may produce an output KJim born in 1983. Okay, so we have used two arguments, f name and year. Those arguments can receive values from the function calling point, and whatever you do with the values f name and year, that is not going to affect the values passed from the function calling point. Okay, and this way of calling function is something known as call by value. We actually pass the value to the arguments, and whatever the function do with the argument values does not affect the value passed from the calling point. Something you might have studied in C. There are ways of calling functions, call by value and call by reference. Okay, so PHP also support call by value and call by reference. Call by reference we will discuss. So this is a way of calling a function using call by value method in PHP. And we haven't actually mentioned what could be the type of f name and year. They respectively become string and number by virtue of the value passed to them. F name receives a string value, so that the variable f name from there on may act as a string. The variable year receives a number value, so from there on that may the variable year may act as a number value. So that is mentioned here. Values are passed to the arguments by virtue of the type of the values passed to them becomes the very same type. Whatever the type of values passed to the arguments becomes the same type. And from PHP version 7 onwards, if you want, you can restrict the kind of values passed to arguments. For example, if you want your argument to receive only integer values, you can make arrangements for that. If your argument has to receive only string value, you can set it accordingly. And for that to happen, we are using another keyword, something known as strict. And this is the usage. After the first line of PHP program, you have to use declare strict type equal to 1. Now you can see the difference. We have a function add numbers with variable a is mentioned as integer, variable b is mentioned as again integer, and this function is called from here, echo add numbers. The first value is a string, a number, second is a string. Okay, so this 5 is supposed to go to variable a, 5 days to integer b, isn't it? Now both a and b are declared as integer. We can even do that in PHP. We can mention the type of the variable, but usually a variable can be declared or used without mentioning the type, but if you want to do it, you can do it. So this is a C kind of usage, the type of variable and the variable. You can follow that usage as well. Okay. Now when values 5 and 5 days pass to function add numbers, and when they respectively received by variables a and b, PHP generates an error. PHP generates an error. It is because both a and b are declared as integer type of value, and the first value that is received by a, that is fine, that is an integer type, but the second value 5 days, that's a string, that when received by an integer variable b, which is supposed to receive only integer value because of this declaration, PHP will raise an issue. PHP will generate an error. So if you have a declaration, declare strict types 1, and if you mention the type of the arguments in your PHP program, you should be careful in passing the same type of values into respective arguments. So add numbers here, the function add numbers with 2 arguments a and b, they both are integer, and for this function to execute properly, the values passed to them, that is the values passed to the 2 arguments of the function add numbers, that would be integers only. Okay, so this is also possible in PHP, like we can restrict the kind of values passed to function arguments in PHP. And another concept is before I will explain this example so that the idea will be clear. You have a function set height, and its argument is declared as integer, and that is assigned a value 50, and this function is supposed to print the height is the value of this variable, value of the variable minimum height. Now you can see multiple function calls. Set height with a value 350. The function set height is called with the value 350, and 350 that will be copied to minimum height. So the value printed out will be 350. Output is 350. And you can see that the second function call is a function call with an empty value. Okay, but the function is declared in such a way that, defined in such a way that it is supposed to receive a value from the calling point. Now from the calling point we are not passing any value, but this function still may execute to produce an output 50. It is because we have mentioned a default value 50 to the argument minimum height in case if the function set height is called without a value. So the second function call is a call without a value, without passing a value. So on that time the function set height may be executed, in the sense it may print the statement the height is the value inside minimum height that will be taken as, that will be assumed as the default value 50. So 50, the output 50 will be produced. So default arguments are the arguments which take some default values in case proper values are not passed from the function calling point. That is a concept. And you can see the third function called set height with the value 135. This time the value is mentioned, and once you mention the value, the default value will be ignored to print a value 135. This time it is not 50 but 135. That's because from the calling point we have given a value that will be passed to the variable minimum height, and the value of minimum height that will be printed as 135. A fourth call to the same function with a value 80. So the default value 50 is overridden again to produce an output 8. That's the concept of default arguments. Now, the functions in PHP can retain values too. So this is also a difference from the functions in C or C++, where you might have seen that if your function has to return a value, you have to mention the type of value the function returns at the function declaration. So it could be, if you are using a function sum, the usage will be either integer sum with values, or it could be void sum with arguments. Now, what's the difference between integer and void? Void is there to suggest that your function does not return any value, and integer sum says that your function sum is going to return an integer value. Okay. With PHP, if your function returns or does not return a value, you don't want to mention the type of value that gets returned to the calling point. Instead, you simply define the function, and if you want to return something to the calling point, use the keyword return. So you can see a function here, function sum, 2 arguments x and y, and this function is called sum 5 comma 10. 5 is copied to x, 10 is copied to y, and the sum of 5 and 10, 15 is assigned to z, and return z now, return 15 to this point to produce the output 15 here. Similarly, function called sum 7 13, 7 to x, 13 to y, sum of their values 20, that may get assigned to z, and when the statement return z is executed, 20 would be returned to this calling point. Okay. For the third function, the returned value will be 6. So this echo statement may produce echo 2 plus 4. I have written only the output value. In fact, the output of all these statements would be, the first one would be 5 plus 10 equal to 15. Second would be 7 plus 13 equal to 20, and with the third echo statement 2 plus 4 equal to 6. Okay, so a return statement actually return values to this point, the function calling point. So this is similar to substituting the value of a variable. If you might have used a value like 5 plus 10, after this dot, if you have a variable, the value of that variable will be substituted here. Similarly, this function call produces the return of certain value to this point, so that value will be printed. Okay, so this function call produces or forces the return of some value. It is 15 at the first time call, 20 with the second call, 6 with the third call. And the bottom line is, you can return a value from a function to the function calling point using a return statement. That is only point relevant. So how PHP functions return a value? You have this answer. It uses a statement return followed by the value that is to be returned to the calling point. Now the second way of calling a function or using a function, we can say passing arguments by reference. PHP functions can also be called using reference arguments. Reference. And for you to use argument reference method, use the ampersand symbol. I will show you an example, and you can come back to this slide. So this is the way of using a function call by way of using argument reference. You have a function art5, and instead of a simple variable value, you prefixed it with the ampersand symbol. So the presence of this ampersand symbol suggests that this is a reference to the variable num that you can see here at the function call. So this variable value is going to act as a reference to the variable num here. What's the difference that makes? You can go through this function for you to have your answer. So what does this function do? This function increases the value of the variable value by 5. So this has to be understood as value equal to value plus 5. This is the shorthand way of writing value equal to whatever is the value of the variable value. So the name of the variable actually makes certain confusion, but it is like value of the variable inside the value of the variable value that is incremented by 5. That is what the function art5 do. Now we use a variable num assigned with a value num. Okay, so the function is called using variable num. The value of variable num is 2. That is now assigned to variable value. Okay, and we haven't used any echo statement here. Instead, we actually try to print the value of num here. and we claim that the output is going to be 7. How that happens? The value of num was originally 2, but after making this function call, when you print the value of variable num, you get a 7 rather than 2. That is because the variable value, as it acts as a reference to variable num, what happens behind is as you make variable value as a reference to variable num, the location which is labeled as num, the concept of variable name is we actually temporarily label some memory location with that name, which means if you use a variable num in your program, you actually label some place in the memory as num where you can store values. Now, once you store a value 2 into variable num, that says that you actually labeled some place in the memory as num, and inside that location you place 2. Now, once you make value as the reference of variable num, in fact, it is like you are also labeling the very same place which you labeled as num with another label value. Okay, so the location which contains 2 may have now 2 labels, value and num. So whatever you do with value inside this function, like the existing value is changed by 5, that actually changes the value here. It changes the value from here. Sorry, I can't make the correction. Okay. It actually make the correction it makes the correction at the same place which is labeled both as value and num. Okay, so the location in which you stored the value of num as 2, that is now changed to 5. That is why when you print the value of num here, that is printed out as 7. So call by reference is a way of referencing the same memory location with multiple names. So once you say value is a reference, the variable value is a reference to variable num, you are actually referencing the same memory location which is at the same time labeled as num and value. So whatever you change with the value of the variable value, that affect the variable num. Whatever you change with the value of variable num, that affect the variable value as well. We are actually referencing the same variable name. Once you say that one variable is a reference to another variable. It is not the same case when you make a function call by way of call by value method. There you have actually 2 different memory locations. If you use a variable at the calling point, that is one particular memory location, and the that you used at the function definition, that would be referring a different memory location. That is because when you call by method of call by value, whatever you do with the value of variables, value of arguments inside the function does not affect the original variable, does not affect the variable that you might have used at the calling point. That's a concept. So that much is about PHP functions. And just go through the slides, and if you have any doubts, you can text me.